the deep stuff of teaching, the deep stuff of teaching, with guest Maria DeBenigno.
Well, my name is Maria DeBenigno. I am currently the Post-Doctoral Research Associate at William & Mary's Highland. And in that role, I am teaching a course in this semester, which is spring 2021, about the role of museums at this particular moment. So taking into consideration 2020 and now 2021. I have also taught courses for the National Institute of American History and Democracy. So I have a little bit of background with other types of more traditional history courses, as well as the American Studies program. So,
were you always interested in education and teaching? Was there a time where you realized that, hey, I want to teach?
I always liked learning. I never thought I would teach, especially as like an undergraduate. I wanted to write. I wanted to travel. I wanted to, I just wanted to tell stories. And so I came to teaching a couple of years after I graduated from William & Mary as an undergraduate. And I had worked in a couple of jobs, and I had an opportunity to substitute teach. And that turned into a long-term middle school English teacher substitute teaching position. That kind of just one of those things that just fell into my lap. And I absolutely loved it. I loved, my students were sixth grade. It was a really fun school, a middle school. And from there, I just decided, okay, I'm going to get my teaching license because I just had some really wonderful classroom experiences, wonderful, helpful administrators, and a really great teaching mentor who helped me figure it out.
Tell me about the teaching mentor. And there was some, I'm teaching middle school here, but you enjoyed it thoroughly. So I want to hear about the mentor and how that mentor helped you to see the light in terms of teaching.
And here's the thing, you couldn't have paid me to go back to middle school based on my own experience.
Same here. I had a very bad middle school.
It was, and so I was initially a little anxious about it. And so I was substituting basically to pay bills. And so I was doing all sorts of different grade levels. And I met a woman, her name was Patty. And she was, I think she was probably in her mid-60s, and she decided to go into the Peace Corps. And she needed someone to take over her teaching position because she had an opportunity to do Peace Corps, and she'd always wanted to do it. So she was already a really cool lady with some really interesting approaches, and her students really loved her. So she really helped me. I don't know if it's gain confidence, but she really showed me how teaching doesn't have to be rote or prescriptive. You can be imaginative, and you can harness curiosity and perhaps student, fidgeting in order to help them learn something and take them outside. And she was just really formative. She was the type of middle school teacher I wish I had, frankly. So even though she went to China to do her Peace Corps term, we stayed in touch, and she left me so many amazing resources. And so that really catapulted me into pursuing my teaching license.
I imagine that your desire to tell stories connected with your teaching through her encouragement of imaginative and different kind of teaching.
Yeah, and the literature I was teaching in a public school, so we had the standards of learning, or the SOL. So there were sort of benchmarks we were supposed to hit. And I'm using air quotes there. And so we were, but within those frameworks, we were able to teach all sorts of different types of novels with the students and poems, and Patty would bring in songs and music and just other texts for students to study and think about.
What changed? So it was an English course that you
Yeah.
were taking, English. How did you bridge into history?
So I taught middle school for about 5 years. So I did 6th grade, 7th grade, and then I was in 8th grade for 3 years. And I decided to go back for my master's. And I didn't want to go back for my master's in English education. I wasn't interested in like a MAT or a master's of teaching. And I wanted something a little bit more focused on actual literary studies and criticism. So I was able to, I actually got a really wonderful fellowship to work on my graduate degree at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And as I was working on my MA thesis, it was a 2-year program, I started to incorporate more public history, so more conversations about museums and tourism and heritage. And that's when my advisor looked at me and she's like, this is really more of an American studies or an interdisciplinary project than straight English or literary studies.
Okay. So how did when you said you wanted to tell stories,
Mm-hmm.
were you talking about writing novels, writing short stories, writing poetry?
Yes, all of the above. I loved writing short stories. I always gravitated towards fiction. I just loved the written word and the power of language.
And how does that feed, or in that initial stage of transitioning with masters, how did the storytelling feed into what you were going to teach and how you wanted to teach?
Well, I came to see the way that history is also the telling of stories, and how primary source documents like diaries and manuscripts and letters and correspondence have their own really rich stories and personalities, and really complicate the biographies that we think we know about the famous people, and then also help illuminate the people we don't know about but we should. So I came to see, and again, I've always gravitated more towards public history, so like museums and tours as opposed to more academic histories, because I felt that there was so much space there to share and tell narratives that hadn't been told.
And the reason, one of the reasons I had you as a guest on the show, we went to Highlands to film, and you really brought out something of the environment and the history of it that was very story oriented. I know that story now, or more, the many stories that could come from that place. And right now, is that you're teaching on Highland? You want to talk about what you're doing with Highlands?
So the course we're teaching, I'm co-teaching with Dr. Jajuan Johnson, who is the Lemon Project postdoc. He and I work very closely, collaboratively. So the course is called Community Laboratory, William and Mary's Highland. And it uses essentially Highland as a case study to examine the role of museums and historic sites. And so using Highland as a historic house museum with kind of a historic building core, in addition to over 500 acres of natural landscape, rural spaces, it is actually kind of a familiar setup for some of these historic sites. So think about Mount Vernon, Monticello. Virginia is kind of the birthplace, for better or for worse, for these types of spaces. And so Highland is just a really rich space to have conversations about representation, about what stories get told, who has a voice in, not approving, but in saying we should move forward with this or we should pull back on that. So there's a real involvement of community. We have an active Council of Descendant Advisors at Highland, so individuals who've descended from those who were enslaved by Monroe, who formed in 2016. So there's a lot of things happening at Highland that are parallel to other historic sites. So while we are focused on Highland, we also have brought in guest speakers from other historic sites in Virginia and elsewhere. And that's where Jajuan has been just amazing with his own museum experience in other parts of the country too. So we've been able to have some amazing, amazing, amazing guest speakers come in that I've learned a lot from.
Yeah, he was on this interview process, and he talked about his love of like local history, local stories that he would find. And I'm sure that applies to Highland in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So tell me more, like, as you grew as an instructor, as a teacher, were you able to incorporate your dreams of writing at all, or is that something you still want to do?
I have been able to incorporate it within, certainly my dissertation ended up being a little bit more of an informal kind of tone. So that was, even though it is not, tech nonfiction, it's not creative, but it is, I was able to have a little bit of creativity with it. And that's to the credit of my advisor in the American Studies program. But I haven't gone back to writing fiction or creative writing. I guess all writing is creative, but I haven't gone back to writing short stories. And it's something a friend of mine is always like, you should write, you should do some historical fiction. You should see how this might translate. So I've been so focused over the last, 6-7 years to finish my doctorate and, get the dissertation out there and try to get some things published that now I'm kind of circling back, and I'm actually reading more fiction, which is encouraging. And I think that's the way you also write fiction. So.
Right. It gets stirred up and used when you're reading a lot.
Yeah.
What is it about teaching now that brings you joy, that brings you happiness?
I love teaching. I really do. I learn from my students. I think it's important to listen to the students. I think the input that they bring to the classroom is just really spectacular. And I think I encourage some of my colleagues to be more, to share the authority of the classroom with the students, be a little bit more open to sharing and producing knowledge together as opposed to simply delivering it. So I love going into the classroom. I love not always knowing the direction the discussion will go. I love the ways that the class might make connections that I or Jajuan hasn't made or haven't sort of, set up, if you will. So it's especially this course that we're working in right now, has just been really generative and expansive in a way that I think the fact that it is an interdisciplinary course has allowed it to be really fun. Yeah.
Well, let's be both of you have brought me a great understanding and desire to learn more. So it's very great.
Thank you.
And with your mentor, was there one piece of advice that she gave you that really helped you to kind of crystallize your teaching experience and caused you to grow?
So we're talking about back when I was doing my sixth grade, back way back then. Way back 15, 16 years ago.
She said to you then that applies to now still?
Yeah, she said that every day starts fresh, and that you can have a really bad day in the classroom, which happens, and you just breathe in deep and you come the next day, refreshed and prepared. And, your students, for the most part will trust that, just because one thing didn't go well, that the next day might not be the exact same way. So she just was very, sort of just take a deep breath, get a good meal in your belly and good night's sleep, and start fresh in the morning. And that's not to sound sort of Pollyanna-ish, but just to the reality that, not to take yourself so seriously.
And have a refresh.
And just hit that button. We're just going to sort of, okay, that didn't work. Can't do that anymore.
Next time.
Next time.
Cool. Do you have any questions that have come to your mind?
Oh, I don't know.
That have bubbled up in the mind of Jacob?
I don't know if I have any questions, but I have mentioned before in these interviews that I do hope to become a teacher someday.
Cool.
And hearing you talk about becoming a teacher and learning about like the growth of your own work over time is really inspiring to me. I really like the idea of knowing that, not every lesson's going to work out exactly how you want it to, that there's a lot of bumps along the road, and like the attitude that you seem to have, where you're learning from each teaching experience and building upon it is it's just something I really aspire to.
Yeah. And I just think it's just so much more exciting that way, is to sort of embrace the unknown. And, some people don't like that, and that's okay. But, there's not very many careers where no day is the same. Do you know what I mean? Like, where there's just a lot of, I don't know, energy that I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
One question comes to mind because I remember the introduction to your class that you recorded on video, which was a part biography of your life and part your interests and introducing museums in a different way. But was there any teaching in your family, like ancestors past? Was it as a part of the family that you grew up in any way?
Yes, my parents always encouraged my learning, my reading. My mom was always bringing me books, and my parents were taking us to museums and to places where we could learn outside, which I think was really cool. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. So my parents' love of learning and bringing it to us was less formal and sort of prescriptive. But my father's Italian. His family is all in Italy still. So I kind of grew up in these really old spaces. Like we would go there in the summertime, and I don't know, some of the buildings were, 400 years old. And so I just always liked old things. And even though I didn't quite realize that was a love of history, I always liked old things. I liked things that were kind of weird and anachronistic and stuff we didn't have in my suburban home in Northern Virginia.
Right. That's interesting how that childhood experience of old things plays into your current experience of teaching about old places. And
it's a little bit of it's funny how you get to where you are because I didn't even consider majoring in history as an undergraduate. But now looking back, I'm like, oh, that was my journey, was getting here, I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah. And history and literature, I don't think they should be siloed separately. I mean, they're informing each other, I think a lot of texts that we consider history are actually works of literature. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, this has certainly been deep stuff of teaching.
Oh, so thank you. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, this is wonderful. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. Anything else? Any other observations, Jacob? No?
This is great.
This was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.